just to mention the word yoga, since I've used the word yoga. Most people obviously think of yoga as what we're going to do, which is like exercise stuff. But it's even harder to define what yoga means than Tai Chi, because it's like this vast history of Indian, basically all Indian religion and practices can be linked back to things called yoga, or the word yoga is used. The word means yoking or to tie or union, and it's kind of talking about, it's really referring to meditation and something to do with the mind. So I'm definitely not an expert on the history of yoga, but one kind of popular branch of the history is called Patanjali's 8 limbs of yoga. So just as an example. So the 8 limbs of his version, or her, or whoever Patanjali was. So they, just to show you the context, that it's more than just this exercise thing. So the 8 limbs of that one is yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. So yama is like abstention, so it's a bit like the 10 Commandments: non-violence, truthfulness, non-stealing, fidelity, non-avarice. That's yamas. And niyama, I think, is like aspirations. So it's like purity, contentment, perseverance, self-study or study, and contemplation of God or reality or something. The word asana is the third one. It means, in that context, we're just talking about your posture and probably sitting or the ground. So asana tends to be mentioned as exercises now. So you do the asanas, which is all the different exercises. But then it didn't probably mean that. It just meant sitting. So that's the third of the 8 limbs of Patanjali. Pranayama is like breath work, or controlling or lengthening or changing the breathing. Pratyahara is sense withdrawal. So like shutting down the senses, or maybe going into a cave or something. Dharana means concentration on like one point. Dhyana is meditation. Interestingly, that word dhyana is like, you see it through different cultures and into Buddhism. So in a lot of South Asian Buddhism, they talk about the jhanas or jhana, which is like meditation states. And that little Zen thing in my wall, like the word Zen is the same word translated from China to Japan as dhyana. So dhyana, jhana. Chan Buddhism was Chinese and Zen Buddhism was Japanese. So that's connected to yoga as Zen, the word Zen. Samadhi is the kind of last one of that particular model, which means kind of like liberation or absorption, union, or yoga or something like that. So it's just a bit of context to the word yoga. It doesn't just mean jumping about in latex pants or whatever, yoga pants. So, and that asana exercise part is just a tiny part of it, or not even part of it, according to that one. There was a guy who researched the history of like exercise as yoga and said he couldn't really find much history of it going back beyond the 20th century in India. So that's kind of a modern phenomenon then. So like, I was at a Tai Chi weekend, maybe like 2003 or something, and someone had this book. So that's, or the earlier version of it. So Van de Scaravelli. The guy that says they're DKSI Iyengar, he was one of the most famous teachers that came from India to teach yoga in the West, and she was an Italian woman that studied with him when she was 50. I think there's a photo of him balancing on her back or something like that somewhere. So that's him bullying her into positions. So he was quite hardcore and a bit of a bully and stuff, apparently, but he's probably responsible for that type of yoga coming to the West. Although it might have come, the guy who did the research into the history of exercise said that there was Western gymnasts that went to India in the early 20th century, and some of the Western gymnastics seem to have been adopted by the Indians. So it may have come from Europe to India, then back to Europe, a lot of that stuff. Anyway, it's not really that important, but it's just to know the kind of context of it. But this thing was interesting when I first saw it, because the stuff that she mentions in this book is like to do with the breath and gravity and relaxing, and it just sounded quite like Tai Chi, but then it turns out she actually did Tai Chi as well. So over the years I worked with people who had met her, or people who worked with people who had met her, or whatever. And eventually I did a teacher training in that approach. That's another book by one of her students called Diane Wong and Sophie Hoare. So it's a really interesting approach that's very like Tai Chi, or like the internal stuff. And a lot of what I do in the classes comes as much from this stuff. So you'll be familiar with the ideas already. It's just we're doing them on the floor, basically, is the main difference. Okay, so that's a bit about yoga. If I'm talking about meditation, my main kind of meditation stuff that I've done has been from Buddhism or Buddhist stuff. But I'm not a Buddhist. I'm not trying to make you a Buddhist or anything. But Buddhism was basically a branch of yoga. If you think about the history of it, it's the story of the Buddha and all that was like he was just a guy that went around trying to work with different teachers in India. So they would have been yogi type people. So it's not really any different to the same tradition that we're talking about. And it's really about meditation, Buddhism, fundamentally, and how the mind works and how to practice that stuff. So just the basic framework of Buddhist practice, it's simple, but there's obviously vast complexities in the literature and stuff around it. But one of the basic ideas, they call it Four Noble Truths. So the first one is called dukkha, which just means suffering or unsatisfactoriness. So in other words, life is difficult. That's the first noble truth. Or you get old and you die and get sick or whatever. So it's sounds a bit miserable, but it could be translated as just things aren't quite satisfactory. They're always a bit annoying somehow. So that's the first noble truth. The second one is, what is the causes of suffering, or dukkha? And it's generally saying it's either you're not wanting things to be as they are, or you're wanting things to be different, which is kind of the same thing. So like aversion or craving is the cause of dukkha, according to that model. Then the third one is like you can actually come out of that cycle. And the fourth one is how to come out of it. So that's basically what Buddhism is talking about. And the fourth part, they break it. There's lots of numbers in Buddhism. There's like the fourfold, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the 10 this, the 4 that, the 3 things. But basically the Eightfold Path is what is the way out of suffering. It's about essentially about meditation and how you act in your life. And it says everything's like correct speech, correct action, or right speech, right action, right livelihood. That's the first 3. Then there's right mindfulness. So mindfulness has become popular, but it's basically come from Buddhism. Right effort, right concentration, right view or right understanding, and right intention or resolve. So that's the Buddhist model. Another way that's simplified is called Sila, Samadhi, Panya. So that's the word samadhi again. Sila means like basically not making things worse than they already are. So like damage limitation, you're kind of how do you behave in life not to make things even more difficult. So that's in how you act and speak and how you have your livelihood. It sounds like a really simple oversimplification, but it's basically to do with ethics or morality or behavior. And given that it's talking about meditation, if your life is chaotic and mad and you're causing all sorts of problems for yourself and other people, it's hard to then sit and meditate and be calm. Unless you're a psychopath, then it's probably okay. So that's the first part of what they call sila. So it's like discipline, ethics, morality, how you live. Same as almost every kind of religion or spiritual practice has that as a basis. Then the samadhi part is about meditation. So what they're calling right mindfulness, effort, concentration, just practicing something. And like in the pandemic, I talk about circuit breaker. So if you're in this cycle of like craving an aversion or something like that, not wanting things to be as they are, wanting them to be different, and just going round and round with that. The practice of meditation is essentially to break that circuit, to just stop it. So that's the part that is your behavior and everything, not making your life bad in the first place. Then the samadhi part is like practicing intentionally to sort of stop these cycles of creating misery in your life or anxiety or other things. And then the last part called panya is like wisdom or understanding or seeing things more as they are than how you want them to be. There's another word, vipassana, that's used. So there's like these meditation retreats I've done, which are called vipassana retreats. But vipassana means seeing clearly. So that's basically a very quick summary of what Buddhism is, but it's a form of yoga and it's basically about meditation. And the purpose of meditation, as according to that, or what I would see it as, is just kind of stopping the cycles of the mind and the nervous system, which are constantly running in the background. And Amanda had said in the class about meditation that it's difficult because you just sit and think and it can't do it. That is actually what they're saying. That's the dukkha part. You can't, if you could sit and just not think, and there was none of this stuff going on in your head, you're perfectly happy and calm, then you wouldn't need to do any of this. That's in a sense, the purpose of it is to deal with that stuff. And the practice is quite simple. You just kind of sit and don't do anything and try and let that stuff unravel by not doing it. And the main way that it's practiced is just to stop, to sit still for a while. And there's lots of different meditation techniques. Maybe to focus on breathing or just focus on the body or just sit and don't move. But they're all kind of trying to do the same thing. Unless you're looking at other practices that they might be trying to do some other things. But for this one, that's basically the kind of meditation that I'll show you. And it's quite simple. But it comes from that context. And it's not about having a belief system. I just see that as a model of practice. It's just, and you don't have to even know that. You can just practice it. But the sort of understanding why it's been described that way, it's a bit like the Tai Chi practice. It has certain jargon and ideas and themes and models as to why you do it. Like you try and develop 6 directions or whatever. It's just similar. It's another model. and I know you probably came here mainly just to get, maybe you've got a sore back or something, or you just want to be a bit healthier. So you might not be interested in all that, but that's what it's about. The actual yoga tradition, that I find it a lot more complex and confusing than the Buddhist stuff. I think it's quite simple. Probably why mindfulness has become popular. So the problem I have with mindfulness as a thing is they tend to have just tried to take that out of that context and just go, just be mindful. And go, right, okay, what do I do now? So they've sort of taken a part of it, and they kind of have the idea that Buddhism's a religion and mindfulness is secular, and it's like just, but to me, it's not a religion in the first place. Although obviously it is a religion in certain countries. The religious side is like they'll go to temples and pray and light incense and chant, and like some of them will see the Buddha as a god and all that. So it's like that's the religious Buddhism in Thailand or Sri Lanka or wherever. But it's not, doesn't really seem to be what it's about. That's more a kind of cultural phenomenon. Does that make sense? Is that all right so far? So, I mean, all we're going to do is practice a little bit of stuff on the floor and sit, but that was just to give you the background of what is yoga and what is meditation, or at least the stuff I've done. And there are quite a lot of parallels between the Buddhist stuff, the yoga, and Tai Chi. We'll start in a very easy position, which is just lying down. So it's lying in this position. And just move around, get comfortable so your legs are bent. You're not trying to stretch out the back, we're just be naturally lying down in your spine. In other words, I'm not trying to press the lower back into the ground or the neck, just a bit like when we're doing a Tai Chi standing, you feel the space behind you. This is now the space behind you. So just tune in with the ground from your head to your feet. And just take some breath. Try not to fall asleep if possible. That's Friday evening, but just relax and breathe in this position. The hands could be on the ground to begin with. So just tuning in the ground. You can lift the feet off the ground and put them back down again. So trying to feel a bit like you're standing on the feet. So there's a little bit of engagement there rather than just sort of dead legs hanging in front of you. So if you imagine walking on your soles of your feet, and then you could also lift the pelvis off and put it down again, so you're trying to sort of touch lightly on the mat or on the ground. So we're just getting in touch with the ground underneath behind us. You could lift the shoulder up one side and the head. You could pick the head up with the hands if you want, just place it back down again. And you're not trying to stretch the neck, just looking directly upwards. With the hands, you could do this position, so just kind of clasping the hands gently and placing the thumb side on your forehead. And maybe just tune in with the breathing, so feeling this kind of light and even touch behind you. And breathing as if you're breathing into the space behind or breathing into the touch behind you. So it's not unlike when we start a Tai Chi class and we try and relax into the ground, we just let go in one direction, which in this case is now behind us rather than underneath. So a lot of the stuff we're doing in Tai Chi, we can do, all of it we can do in this practice. We're just doing it in different postures. So the same way in the Tai Chi, we start to engage more upward. If you think of upward as now where you're looking in terms of gravity on the ground. So where your elbows are pointing and where your knees are pointing is up. So see if you could relate the up and the down in this position, which now seems like forward and back if we were standing up. So for example, take one hand on an elbow and have the elbow pointing upwards towards the ceiling. And see if from touching your elbow, you can sort of feel the ground behind your shoulder through your upper arm. So you can feel the relationship between the elbow and the back of the shoulder girdle and shoulder blade. Or you could feel through the forearm if your hand's resting on your head to the head or the back of the head. So that's from the elbow down towards the ground. And try that on the other side. So when we're trying to find these connections in Tai Chi, it's the challenge is that our arms are not touching anything, but here we're now touching, or the back isn't actually touching anything, but it is now. So that we can work on these relationships and connections. So from the elbow to the shoulder blade, or to the back of the head. And that feeling of just when we, if you think of the Tai Chi, when we sort of float the shoulders and open the shoulder, try and keep the shoulder open, but the feeling is a bit different because the force of gravity is coming through the shoulder differently. So see if you can move the shoulder a little bit to keep it sort of open. If you know what that means. So again, now we'll go the other way, so like from your back, or from the ground behind you, the back of your head. Feel like you could press the elbow up towards the ceiling or into your hand. So you can feel from the ground to the elbow. And with the hand, think of the fingers like when we touch the space. So you've got, rather than just a completely floppy hand, you could have a feeling of touching the fingertips and the elbow coming up from the ground. If you have that feeling, you can do it both elbows at once. Back of your head. And if you feel you're getting stiff here, just move around a bit if you want to move. You can sort of roll side to side, just to keep yourself awake and not getting too sleepy and stiff. So we might use the breath a bit more continuously in the yoga practice. So that connection from the back of the head, back of the shoulders to the elbow, see if you could imagine sort of breathing into that. So feel it and breathe in that relationship. As if you can breathe into the fingertips and the elbow from the back, like a kind of circuit. And the breath is meeting the ground and meeting the space above you, around you. So another thing to notice while we're lying here on the ground if you think of the arch of the foot, well, you can feel the arch of the foot standing there, but there's also the kind of arch behind your neck and behind the lumbar spine. So we're not flat completely on the ground. Maybe you are, but it's probably unlikely. So there is that space behind your neck, behind the lumbar spine, and the arch of the foot. So you can feel all of that behind you. So we're not trying to stretch ourselves longer. And one thing you could also imagine is that you're being contained a little bit more. So those curves are allowed to be there. So that we're breathing the kind of top part of the body, the contact behind the head out to the elbows. If you want to, you could like think of the Tai Chi pushing movement, or like you're touching the ceiling. You take the hands off the head and you could feel like you're touching the ceiling with the hands. And that kind of movement of expanding out or pushing from your back that we do when we're standing, you can feel that here. Ground's behind you and you're pushing forward. Like when we're doing our 6 directions type thing. Or if you were doing a bench press, you would feel the support of your back, but it would maybe have a kind of lighter idea. So whether the hands are moving or resting in the head, you can relate the back out to the space above you and breathe into it. Then try and do the same from behind the waist to the knees. So just try and feel that the contact behind the pelvis being similar to the back of the head, back of the shoulders, out to the elbows, out to the knees. As if there was something resting on your knees. It's harder to put the hands there, but you can imagine there's a hand on your knee that you can touch from the ground behind you out to the knee. And if someone was resting a hand there, they could sort of feel towards your hip or towards your foot and through the leg the other way. So you could go from the foot to the knee or from the hip to the knee. Same as from the shoulder to the elbow or from the elbow to the hand, the fingers to the toes. And we're on the ground and we're relating out to the space. So just play around with that for a minute. You can maybe move around again and just come out of the effort of trying to figure any of that out. You can take the feet off again, take the pelvis off again, or move around. And then see if you could then just feel that connection from the ground to the space above, up to the hands and the feet through the lungs. Same way as we pushed with the hand, you can think of like the foot connecting upwards to the ceiling, like you're kicking upwards or touching something with the foot. And you can feel how the other foot on the ground is like going the other way. So same as the hands going up. And the one big advantage in yoga compared to Tai Chi is you can work a lot more with the legs, doing more stuff that you can't easily do in Tai Chi because you're standing on the ground all the time. You can do kicks. But see if you could relate the foot to the hip here. So like, not just the hip, but the sacrum and the pelvis behind you is the ground behind, and then the foot is growing out and up out of that. The leg is coming out of that. So rather than thinking of the main difference in this approach to most normal yoga, or the majority of what's called yoga, is about stretching generally. It's like stretch. So we're not trying to stretch in this stuff. But you may lengthen and open, but it's not, I'm not trying to stretch my hamstrings particularly. If that happens, it's more of a consequence of something else. I'm more trying to relate places, the same as a Tai Chi. It's more about the 6 directions and the breath and the center and the spine than stretching things. But the positions might look a bit more stretched than Tai Chi, depending what we're doing. But I'm not particularly flexible anyway. So. But it's interesting with the legs to then relate the foot to the ground through the hip. And you can try that, like you could take the feet together, like cross the legs, do something like that. So you get both legs going up, or you can take both legs up. But try not to strain to stretch to do it. Try to keep the kind of integrity of just to wherever you can, even if it's just to here, wherever you can put your leg. If I start to strain to do something, then notice if you're doing that, like trying to pull the things around or strain from the center. You should still be able to breathe and feel the whole thing, like we're doing Qigong on the ground. Posture, but you can do something like, you don't have to be centered on the back, you can come slightly to the side and feel it. So come on to kind of, I mean, we could completely come to the side, like lying like that, but you can't, you maybe try that. So lying like this, depending on what it's like for your hip here. But now I'm in a different orientation. This is now the ground sideways, the ribs. That's now up. It's not that difficult to work out. But if I was taking the leg up this way now, it's sort of coming through a different angle of the hip. And this part, the back of the leg, or the side of this leg is now the ground, the side of the foot is now the ground. So I want to still engage with the ground, rather than the leg just being dead here. It's like I'm using different surfaces that we're trying to imagine when we do Tai Chi, but now we've actually got the contact at the side of the thigh or the side of the foot, the side of the waist and the ribs, the back of the arm. So these points of contact change now. And I can use that to move from the ground in a different angle. So try and, if you are in this position, get in touch with that. Touch the ground, use the ground, feel the space at the side of you is now the ground. As long as your head's okay in this position, that you're not pulling on the neck or something. And this part is now in contact with space. Well, we're always in contact with space, but I can explore that movement out into space from the ground at a different angle. And in yoga, people will like hold their toe and stretch the leg. I can't really do very much of that anyway, but you can. That's one position you might get into, is holding the foot, but only if it feels like you're not pulling yourself into weird, forcing things to happen. So that's basically the same idea as lying back, but you're lying on the side. You can try that on the other side and feel the change of the contact. You could also practice kind of rolling, changing the contact continuously, but you try just coming inside and notice how that is now the ground at the side of you. And if you're supporting the head, try to work out how to do that in a way that's not disrupting the structure. So this is now part of the structure of this arm holding the head. So I have to use that part of the ground behind my arm, support the head from the ground, rest the head on the ground, but also come up from the ground. I could think of coming out through the head or all different directions, even just in this position. And touching the space with the foot or the hand, using the ground. And you can use that as a purchase point or a contact point, breathing into it. And breathing into the touch of the foot in the air, like you're touching the ceiling. And you don't have to stretch for it, you can just be there wherever you want. Like the feeling that we're doing the class with the pushing against the door. You don't have to reach for the door. Then you can come back onto your back and do that again. So feeling the same idea on the back or on the side. And just a good sort of general releasing movement, lying your back is just letting the knees rock side to side. And you could do that by kind of flopping and falling apart, but if we try and do it in a sort of integrated way, then we're still using the feet, although the contact point's changing. And the knees are still in space. We're still kind of engaging in the space. One of the yoga postures you could get into here is like supine twist. So the knees are going in one direction. The head could start to look the opposite way slightly, but try not to pull yourself to do that. Just maybe gently, small movement to begin with. The head could be neutral or looking anywhere, but in the twisting movement, the head's going the opposite way from the knees. The hands can be just out to the side. So you can use the wings to support you behind you as the knees move side to side. And none of this is particularly difficult. The difficult part is or the challenge in this is to engage with it differently, to engage the same way we do in Tai Chi. If all we were doing was that movement, it would be pretty boring and probably not really doing all that much. It might help just to mobilize your hips a little bit. But if we try and engage with it fully, the whole body's involved, the breath and the awareness. One of the things that's very clearly in the Scaravelli yoga that is not really mentioned much in other yoga, and it is in Tai Chi, but it's still not that clearly mentioned, is the thing of like opening and closing or expanding and gathering in. So just to mention that, so when I'm saying like reach out from the ground and touch, that's a bit like the opening. But I could also feel this sort of pulling back thing and gathering back in from the hands. Like I'm just like the little donkey thing I've got. So you could be thinking of kind of integrating the body or opening it when we're in any of these positions. So if I was here, I could be sort of opening out, but I could be sort of pulling back together as well, expanding. And that's, if say I've got my leg up like that, if I'm just always thinking of stretching it and pulling it, there might be a benefit of like bringing the leg back into the body and gathering things back in again. Then they might open out differently. So we'll get the contact of the ground, breath, the integration or expansion of the space touching around us, above us, behind us. So we think of the pull up. So I'm not pulling up this way, I'm pulling the same way as if I was standing. So reaching above my head and pulling this way. And the thing of like getting the core to engage in that direction towards my head. And if I was going to take the pelvis off the ground, I could try and do it by doing that, by sort of lifting up, pulling up, and taking the weight off the pelvis so that it comes off the ground. And that's like a lengthening up towards the head that's starting to take me into that position, which is towards a back bend, like the cover of that book with the extreme back bend. So if I just said lift the pelvis, you would probably just use the muscles in the legs and the lower back to lift. But the idea of this stuff is more like the Tai Chi. We're trying to find different ways of moving, with different connections. So the pulling myself this way to lift the core, I could try and use that to lift the pelvis off the ground. So the core is more coming up. If I want to have the springy feet as well, and maybe the feeling of suction from the feet as well at the other end, so the feet are active and the core is active. I still want to use the back of the head and the ground behind me as support and the breath. The hands could be on the ground like this, sometimes at bridge. This is like bridge posture. But the hands could be maybe pulling or above. But try not to be doing it from your back, do it from more the front and from through the legs to the back of the head. And when you go back down, don't try and flatten the back, just let the hips, when we sort of fold at the hips in Tai Chi, let the hips relax to settle the pelvis back down. So the thing that we do in the Tai Chi with is the hips seated and not pushing, tucking the tail under, would also apply here. So I don't want to be pulling the tail and rocking the hips. I can relax the hips and I'm letting some curve to be in the spine there by doing that. But when I'm pulling the core up, I can still try and keep the hips relaxed rather than pushing the tail under and locking the hips. So the legs are coming in towards the spine, the core is involved. And all we're doing is just lifting the pelvis off the ground a little bit. So using the feet, using the core, the back, the upper. Contact of the upper back on the ground. It's almost like the springy feet, feeling on the balls of the feet. To have that point of contact is quite important, so the feet are doing something. So hopefully you're able to follow this. We'll maybe just do one other basic position tonight and then do a little meditation thing, because it's already 8 o'clock. Is that right? Yeah. So if you have a rest for a moment, you could maybe just watch me for a second. And I'm not going to show off any impressive gymnastics or anything, but just to show you the kind of orientations of these practices for a second. So there's positions here, and it would take time to get into, especially if you've got back issues or anything. But the kind of asanas here are this one, the twisting one. When the legs come up, you could be here, but that eventually goes to shoulder stand. Or the plow. I can't do all of the asanas, but shoulder stand is here, like that. But the way I went up there, I did it quite quickly, but I'm trying to use the ground behind me to move into that kind of position. But that's maybe, I wouldn't suggest you force yourself to do that. It's just to give you an idea of what movements come from here to the shoulder stand. And the opposite of that is back bend. Part of the back bend is getting the hands and arms connected. And you don't ever have to go up into these positions. There's always variations you can do, like the shoulder stand you can do with the legs on the wall. And the back bend, some people I know never, I've done yoga for years and never gone into back bend, but that's where you could go from here. So it would be like taking the pelvis off, but taking the head off, not taking it off your body, but off the ground. So something like this. And when I do that, sometimes I can't really do it. It just doesn't feel like my body wants to move like that. But if I set things up well and I'm relaxed enough, then that felt quite easy there. But this practice is much more about the setup and the connections and how I find the connections rather than try and get myself into that position at all costs. So if things are feeling quite reasonable, like I've got the feet working, something through the center, the hands somehow are connected, then that's kind of all right. Feels a little bit stiff on my back there, but anyway, that's back bending. Can't really speak from an after. So that's positions on your back. There's other things like you can, I'm really not flexible in the legs, but people do things like that and grab their feet. I'm sure you've seen yoga before, I don't have to show all this to you, but from there we could come up to sitting, just to show some of the things we would do, like work on sitting positions. There's this kind of position, like sometimes called boat posture. But everything can be adapted and made simple. Sitting is quite difficult on the ground for most people. But even just practicing sitting on the ground and having your legs in different positions. I can't do full lotus or anything ridiculous like that. And when I'm doing meditation, I don't sit cross-legged because I find it too difficult. But even just simple movements around sitting, I don't do enough of this, so I'm quite stiff in this area. And then we're coming to this sort of position. So just starting from all fours. Takes you into a lot of other postures, but we'll maybe do a bit of this tonight, so if you can get into all fours. And you can either have the elbows on the ground or the hands. Having the elbows on the ground is quite relaxing. It's quite similar to where we were on our backs. Like if my head's on the heel of the hand or where the thumb is or just off there, it's almost the identical position to what we were doing. It's similar to being on our backs. And everything we did, like the feeling of like touching, where are the points of touch? So it's give you the tips of the toes or the balls of the feet, probably the tips of the toes in this position. Or it could be like the top of the feet, the knees, the forearms and the hands. And you could just explore, or you could be on the palms of your hands. But playing around with that, where you are on the ground. You can extend one leg back, you can go into another, like towards plank posture. If I move the body back, I'm in It's like towards child's pose, what do you call it in yoga? Or there's another one, I can't remember. Hair pose or something. But just getting familiar with being here and what is happening, making connection to the ground your first point of awareness. Then when we start to kind of breathe into that, relax into it, this thing of from the ground upwards, now the upward direction is behind us and down is in front of us. So we have to then change our compass a little bit to go where's up and down, where's the ground, and where's the space above. There's still the space to the side, so all the 6 direction stuff, we can reset the compass and go, well, above my head is now parallel to the ground, or and you can try and sort of engage into those points. So like the thing of the ball on the head in the Tai Chi, like can you find that ball? It's now not above your head, it's like it's the wall in front of you. And if you imagine like you had eyes on the top of your head, or you were like a crocodile or a dog with your face is on the top of your head, you're looking out from the top of your head that way. This thing of the hips, like not pulling the tail under, you can sort of feel the fold in the hips, where you could rest onto the thigh with your body. So that's another thing you can feel in this position, and how that connects to your feet. So how the feet connect through the hips into your spine. How the hands connect from the ground into your shoulders. Engaging with the space behind you. Like resting the spine on the ground when you're lying on your back. And the postures here, this one's like called cat pose when you're kind of in that position. Rounding out the back a bit, but if you're just pulling on your back to do that, it's not really in line with this principle. So that's like cat pose with the hands, but you can do it sort of with the elbows, which is just really exploring the contact of your back and the space above you. It might take you into a slightly rounded out position if you did it more actively. Then if you sort of fold the hips, I think they call that cat and cow or something. So it's more like flexion and extension of the spine, but that's not how we want to do it. We want to try and do it from 6 directions type stuff. Otherwise you're just pulling the spine, which is probably just not, it may just hurt your back doing that. You can make independent movements, wriggle around, do stuff, move, but then try and engage these, the touch and the space and the breath. We'll just do one last thing in this position and we'll sit down from it. So the last thing here is like the core engagement's a bit harder because it feels like your belly's falling towards the ground. So we're looking at the breathing. All that stuff is like engaging the core, but the feeling of the pull up is a bit harder to do here because you're like, how do you pull up in this position to get the core engaged? But if you just think of something, my friend used to come poke me in the stomach. Imagine somebody's about to punch you in the stomach so that your belly doesn't completely fall out forwards under gravity. If you go with the reverse breathing idea of like, you can sort of engage the core a little bit. And that's supporting the spine from breathing. And if you get that feeling, you try and find it just from breathing. sort of actively breathing. So that's probably enough just for tonight in terms of 2 positions. It's really simple, but there's a lot of practice on that. Just to show you the things you can do here, the simple things. So that's cat and cat pose. And really means you can do things like that. So you take the leg back, or you come into like that one. It's a bit harder, obviously, this kind of plank position. So that you are developing more core strength and things as well. But if we were doing that, you're trying to do it within the principles. You could just do it as a strength exercise as well. So that would be like plank. But with the legs in a bit, there's this child pose. And then bringing the knees off the ground that's called the elbow dog. Again, I'm not very flexible in the legs to straighten the legs, but I'm not trying to do that. Or with the hands on the ground, taking the knees off the ground, that's downward dog. And you can move around in these positions. There's other things like that, pigeon, that's called. There's things like threading one arm through to do a bit of a twist. What else? From there, if you're able to do things like headstands, this takes you into a headstand, which I normally would only do against the wall, so I'm not that confident that I can do it. Or a handstand. So that's starting to give you support on your hands to do things like that. But only if we're not going to be doing stuff like that in this class, but it shows you where you can go with it. The only other position really on the ground is this kind of position where you go into kind of back bending, like that type of movement. Cobra, upward dog. There can be things with your legs, but I wouldn't do much more than the basics for my own practice anyway. You could, and from here you can get into squatting positions. So finding these sort of functional ways of moving as well is useful. Like how do you get up from the ground? Stuff like that. Especially because some people can't get up and down from the ground. So it's useful. But it's a way of practicing with the same principles as the Tai Chi. And it makes when you do Tai Chi, you understand the body a bit more, I think, from doing this stuff, because how do you relate hand to spine? Well, if you can do it here, it's a bit more obvious. Building up your awareness and connections. Yeah, and there are other standing yoga postures, but most of the Tai Chi covers a lot of that anyway. It's the same thing like we're doing in the Tai Chi, the exact same principles. You want to start the meditation with that because it means your body is in a better position to meditate than if you just sort of going right, collapsed or tense or something. Or trying to just sit upright, but not the thing of the 6 directions and whatever you want to call it, connected body. It's like I can sit there with the feet and the hands helping my spine, or I could sit collapsed, or I could sit holding the spine rigid. But if I can use the ground, the feet, the sitting, buttocks, and get contact there, everything, the space around me, same as a Tai Chi. And then to do the thing that we're trying to ultimately do is sit still for a while. It's better to have the body fully engaged when you sit still. And you might just practice the body engagement for 10 minutes or 20 minutes, not even trying to meditate. Because it's like you're building up the structure to be able to do it. And I'd say, for my own practice, if I was sitting for maybe an hour or something, I might spend the first 20 minutes just working on the posture. And that might be enough to practice for months or forever even. You just go and just practice sitting. But usually eventually you'll be comfortable enough to sort of relax and just sit comfortably in stillness for a bit. Then you're moving towards meditation. So I'll just sit like that usually on these blocks. And by sitting like that, my spine doesn't feel like it's being pulled, and it's mainly feeling that the spine is not being pulled. The knees aren't hurting too much or at all. And you can breathe and sort of relax and be upright. And the kind of 6 directional things that we do in Tai Chi, I can do all of that here. And just work on the posture and it feels comfortable and upright. And by having that full body engagement, that you get into a place of ease and sitting by doing that a lot more than if you just try and sit in pain. Some teachers I work with, we talk about sitting in pain and just go, my knee hurts immediately. I'm like, well, it doesn't sound very useful. Like they make a virtue out of sitting in pain, but I don't think it's particularly good. So better to sit comfortably, even if you're on a chair, or even the main difference between lying down and relaxing and meditating. I don't think you can meditate lying down really. It's something about being upright, because meditation is about awareness and something to do with awareness. And when you lie down, your awareness tends to get a bit more sleepy or restless or something. So the sitting upright is about that. And you can go into quite deep sort of states, but you're still awake. You might also fall asleep occasionally. Occasionally on retreat, sometimes you go up and just falling asleep, sitting up. But generally it's about being upright and awake. And you can have the eyes open or closed. But all I want us to really start with is the body posture stuff. So wherever you're sitting, we've got the touch of the ground and the contact points, the same as when we're lying on our backs. You've got your sit bones or where you're sitting. And if we think of our Tai Chi standing, so you've got the relaxed feeling, that that thing of like floating the ball up, you can maybe try that. So like you're holding the ball, it's floating up, and it's giving you an upward lift through the body. Or the feeling of pulling yourself on the rope. You can engage with that with your hands as well if you want, or just imagine it. Another thing, depending how you're sitting, if I could think of like, I'm going to get up off this cushion, so I have to use the legs to lift me up. If there's a little bit of that sense of like, you could engage the touch of the feet or the legs to lift you just by pressing into them. If you're sitting cross-legged, that would be like the edges of the feet. But there's something in the ground that's a bit like in standing, like we're going to jump. So the base can be supporting me upward by engaging with that, like I'm going to jump up from sitting. This is just postural work to make it comfortable. and alert and relaxed. It's exactly the same as the standing in Tai Chi. So we can have the ball on the head, the floating, pulling. We're pretty much more anchored on the ground because we're sitting. And we have a little bit of open and closing movement with the ribs, that sort of thing. So you can be aware of that part. So if I'm like, if I sit like this, I'll get a sore back eventually because I'm using too much of the back. If I collapse that way, I might also get a sore back, I don't know. But this part of like containing the ribs, using the core. So it's something about that movement of the ribs, the open and close and flex extend, is part of sitting upright. So the ribs and the breathing. And again, like in the yoga, like Patanjali's 8 limbs of yoga, after asana was pranayama. So you can do a few things with the breath. You don't have to do too much complicated stuff. Even we could go through some of the pranayama things in more detail, but just simple thing you can do is just like kind of panting breath, or even just a couple of those where you're sitting gives you a bellows in the core that goes and it can lift you up. So just engaging the core through the breath. So I might, if I'm like just starting meditation, I might do that a little bit just to get things up and inflated and open and using the breath. The feeling of like breathing up to the collarbones, so that the arms aren't too heavy hanging down. With the hands in meditation, they do mudras and things, but I don't particularly. You can just have the hands resting on the legs, or one that I do is like just a hand on top of the other hand sometimes, and the thumbs touching that kind of one. The mudra can be useful maybe just to keep you aware of like your posture and alert, rather than having the hands just kind of flopping around. And even in the beginning of the practice, just to go, the hands are engaged a bit like when we're holding a ball. This is almost like holding a ball, just to engage the whole body. And we've not really started doing meditation yet, but it's the foundation of it. It's like, it's better that you spend time doing this, because otherwise you'll be distracted by your body more. So we're kind of bringing it on board with us, going, right, I'm not just going to sit here until everything hurts or I feel tired or whatever. So it's also making us feel a bit more energized. And you're more likely to sustain a little practice of meditation if the body's coming along with you, than fighting against it. Although that may come up at some point if you sit for longer. So we'll just sit another 5 minutes or something, and just work with the posture, really. Any of the ideas that we did, you can even move the arms around and just practice the posture. So we're just practicing the posture, like we're not meditating yet, just practicing the posture. You can sit for longer, you can sit more comfortably and with less distraction if you spend the time doing that. And if you are trying this later on your own or anything, you probably get to a point where you feel comfortable enough, and then just sit and breathe and relax, and with a kind of suggested aim of finding stillness. And noticing if you've got a urge to move around or stop, just notice what happens and try to, for a period of time, just sit and don't do anything else, just sitting. And getting to the point where the movement is less and less and less, and you could have the idea that I'm going to practice not moving at the end of the process of establishing the posture. We're going to stop moving for a little bit. But you're still breathing, body's still moving. You can make obviously micro movements just to stay comfortable, but try and minimize them or make them smaller. If they're still there, make them really small. So maybe not holding yourself at gunpoint saying don't move, but getting to the point where you don't move. Beyond that, you can do other things like start to scan through the body, so you're not moving, but you're feeling, say, feeling the legs, feeling the torso, feeling the arms, feeling the head. And on the Vipassana 10-day retreat, that's basically all. After the first 3 days, you sit and just observe the breath at your nostrils and nose. And then most of the retreat is just sort of scanning the body and trying to sit still. But you don't have to follow a method. But that is a useful way to bring your mind into the body, is just to feel like a body scan, basically. So you're feeling either from the head to the ground or from the ground up or up and down. And we're not trying to breathe with it like in the Qigong, it's just feeling the body. You can work with breathing, you can just focus on the breath. I tend not to do that. I did that initially when I was taught meditation and things like counting the breath and all that, but I don't really. I get more used to sitting still and feeling the body. And the breathing is there, but I'm not trying to focus on it particularly. But you can do that if you want to try that. And as you move in towards more meditation type practice, one of the phrases in Buddhism is arising and passing away. So things will arise and pass away, whatever it is, sensation or thought. It could be pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. And the thing of like the circuit breaker idea is like, rather than following that feeling or thought or whatever, just stay with the body and stay with stillness and just observe the arising of the thing or things. And allowing them to be there, whatever they are, whether they're good or bad. But coming back to just the stillness of sitting and sensations in the body. There's obviously going to be a point where you go, I'm going to stop doing this now and get on with my life. But you can decide how long you want to do that for. But usually, if you spend a bit longer doing it, it has a stronger effect. And it is the effect of stopping the kind of cycle of the mind, just going around like a hamster wheel. But that's also affecting your body, so the constant activity of the nervous system and the mind is kind of constantly stimulating the body. So if you give yourself the period of time to stop that process, your body gets a deep rest as well, especially inside. and it can be absolutely transformative. From like when I had COVID, for example, I was feeling horrific. If I forced myself to sit, and there was a period it was awful sitting through horrible feelings, but I could almost get to the point where I was feeling fine by the end. For a bit, it felt like it's gone. All of the sensations and symptoms had gone completely for a short time, and then came back again. But you can basically burst certain bubbles of things completely through meditation. So it's worth doing.